The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton as General Margaret Harrison stepped out of her black sedan. At 52, she commanded respect with every stride. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect military bun, and her uniform displayed 30 years of distinguished service. 4 bronze stars gleamed on her collar, marking her as one of the highest-ranking female officers in the United States Army. General Harrison had seen it all. She had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, commanded peacekeeping missions in Kosovo, and helped coordinate relief efforts during Hurricane Maria. Her reputation was built on discipline, honor, and an unwavering commitment to military protocol. Every soldier under her command knew that she demanded excellence and would accept nothing less than perfect military bearing. As she walked toward the main administration building, soldiers throughout the base snapped to attention. Each one delivered a crisp salute, which the general returned with practiced precision. This was the natural order of things at Fort Braxton. Rank was respected, traditions were upheld, and military courtesy was never questioned. The base buzzed with activity as preparations continued for the annual Memorial Day ceremony. Hundreds of family members would arrive to honor fallen soldiers, and everything had to be perfect. General Harrison had personally overseen every detail of the planning. The ceremony would showcase the finest traditions of the American military, and she would not tolerate any deviation from protocol. Near the entrance to Building C, a small crowd had gathered around a young woman in civilian clothes. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with long dark hair and wearing a simple blue dress. Several junior officers were attempting to direct her toward the visitor processing center, but she seemed confused and distressed. General Harrison noticed the commotion and altered her path to investigate. As the ranking officer on base, any disruption to normal operations fell under her purview. The young woman was speaking rapidly to Staff Sergeant Martinez, gesturing toward a photograph she held in her trembling hands. "Ma'am, you need to go through proper visitor procedures," Martinez was explaining with professional patience. "If you're here for the ceremony tomorrow, you'll need to register at the main gate and receive a visitor's pass." The young woman shook her head frantically. "You don't understand. I have to find someone. This is urgent. My grandfather told me to come here if anything ever happened to him." As General Harrison approached, the small group of soldiers immediately came to attention. She acknowledged their salutes with a sharp nod before focusing her attention on the young civilian. Years of command experience had taught her to assess situations quickly, and something about this woman's demeanor suggested genuine distress rather than typical visitor confusion. "What seems to be the problem here?" General Harrison asked in her crisp, authoritative voice. Staff Sergeant Martinez stepped forward to explain. "General, this civilian is asking about someone named James Kowalski. She doesn't have proper identification or clearance to be on base, but she's insisting it's an emergency." The name James Kowalski meant nothing to General Harrison. Fort Braxton housed nearly 15,000 active duty personnel, and she couldn't be expected to know every soldier personally. However, the young woman's reaction to hearing the general speak was unexpected and troubling. Instead of showing the typical deference that civilians displayed when encountering a high-ranking military officer, the young woman stepped closer and looked directly into General Harrison's eyes. Her expression shifted from confusion to something resembling recognition, though they had never met before. "Are you the commanding officer here?" the young woman asked quietly. "I am General Harrison, yes. Now, if you could please explain your business here and provide proper identification, we can help direct you to the appropriate office." What happened next would replay in General Harrison's mind countless times over the following days. The young woman did not step back respectfully. She did not offer an apologetic smile or fumble for identification. Instead, she stood perfectly still, maintained eye contact with the general, and spoke a single name with absolute clarity. "Thompson." The word hit General Harrison like a physical blow. Her composure, built over 3 decades of military service, cracked for just a moment. Her eyes widened slightly, and her breath caught in her throat. The surrounding soldiers noticed the change immediately, though none understood its significance. Thompson. It was a name the general had not heard spoken aloud in over 25 years. A name she had buried so deeply in her memory that she had convinced herself it might have been a dream. A name that connected to the darkest chapter of her military career, a chapter that officially did not exist. The young woman seemed to understand the impact of her words. She took another step closer, lowering her voice so only General Harrison could hear. "My grandfather was Staff Sergeant James Kowalski, 3rd Battalion, Special Operations. He told me that if anything ever happened to him, I should come here and find the person in charge. He told me to say that one name, and that whoever heard it would understand. General Harrison's mind raced backward through time. 3rd Battalion Special Operations had been her first command assignment as a young captain. It was 1998, and she was 27 years old, eager to prove herself in a military that still questioned women's capabilities in combat roles. The mission that connected to the name Thompson had been classified at the highest levels, buried under layers of government secrecy that remained intact even today. Staff Sergeant James Kowalski had been one of her most trusted soldiers during that deployment. He was a career military man with an impeccable record and an unwavering loyalty to his fellow soldiers. If he had indeed told his granddaughter to speak that name, it meant something had gone terribly wrong. "When did your grandfather pass away?" General Harrison asked quietly, though she maintained her military bearing despite the internal turmoil. 3 days ago, the young woman replied. "Heart attack. But, before he died, he gave me specific instructions. He said there were things I needed to know about our family's military service. Things that had been kept secret for too long." The general glanced around at the soldiers who were still standing at attention, waiting for orders. This conversation could not continue in such a public setting. Too many ears, too many questions that could lead to complications she was not prepared to address. "Sergeant Martinez, please escort our visitor to Conference Room B in the administration building. Provide her with temporary visitor credentials, and ensure she has refreshments while she waits." "Yes, ma'am." "How long should she be prepared to wait?" General Harrison looked once more at the young woman, noting the determination in her eyes and the way she held that photograph like a lifeline to answers she desperately needed. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. And, Sergeant, this meeting is classified. No one else is to be informed about our visitor or the nature of her business here." As the small group dispersed and the young woman was escorted toward the administration building, General Harrison remained standing in the courtyard. The normal sounds of base operations continued around her, but her mind was trapped in memories from a quarter-century ago. Operation Thompson had been her baptism by fire as a commanding officer. The mission details remained sealed, but it had involved a covert operation in Eastern Europe during the final stages of Cold War tensions. What was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance mission had turned into something far more complex and dangerous. The operation had gone wrong in ways that still gave her nightmares. Good soldiers had died, including several under her direct command. The official reports had been sanitized and buried, and everyone involved had been sworn to absolute secrecy. It was understood that speaking about Operation Thompson would end careers and potentially endanger national security. James Kowalski had been there during those dark weeks. He had seen everything, participated in decisions that haunted her even now, and helped cover up mistakes that could never be made public. They had made a pact, along with the other surviving members of the unit, that the truth about Thompson would die with them. Now his granddaughter was here, speaking that forbidden name and claiming to have information about family military service that had been kept secret. General Harrison knew she was about to face a reckoning she had hoped would never come. As she walked toward the administration building, her steps measured and professional despite her inner turmoil. General Harrison began mentally preparing for a conversation that could destroy everything she had built over the past 25 years. The young woman's failure to salute was no longer relevant. The name she had spoken had changed everything. The hallways of the administration building felt longer than usual as General Harrison made her way to Conference Room B. Junior officers and enlisted personnel stepped aside respectfully, offering crisp salutes that she returned automatically. None of them could have guessed that their commanding officer was walking toward what might be the most important conversation of her career. Outside Conference Room B, she paused to collect herself. Through the small window in the door, she could see the young woman sitting at the conference table, still clutching that photograph. Whatever secrets James Kowalski had shared with his granddaughter, they were about to become General Harrison's responsibility. She straightened her uniform, took a deep breath, and opened the door to face the consequences of Operation Thompson after 25 years of silence. The young woman looked up as the general entered, and, once again, she did not stand or show the automatic deference that most civilians displayed in the presence of a high-ranking military officer. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you for agreeing to see me, General Harrison." "Before we continue," the general replied, taking a seat across from her unexpected visitor, "I need to know exactly what your grandfather told you about Thompson, and why he believed it was important enough to send you here after his death." The young woman placed the photograph on the table between them. It showed a group of soldiers in combat gear, standing in what appeared to be a war-torn European landscape. Among the faces in the photograph, General Harrison recognized her younger self, and there, standing beside her, was Staff Sergeant James Kowalski. My grandfather told me that 25 years ago, you and he served together in an operation that was covered up by the government. He said that innocent people died because of decisions that were made, and that the truth was buried to protect powerful people. General Harrison felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. The photograph on the table was evidence that Operation Thompson had existed, despite all official denials. More importantly, it suggested that James Kowalski had kept records of events that were supposed to have been erased from history. He also told me, the young woman continued, that you were not responsible for what went wrong. He said you tried to do the right thing, but you were overruled by people higher up the chain of command. People who are still in positions of power today. The general stared at the photograph, remembering the faces of soldiers who had not survived to see their families again. The weight of command decisions made by a 27-year-old captain in impossible circumstances. The cover-up that had followed, orchestrated by senior officials who had more to lose than a young officer's career. What exactly did your grandfather want you to do with this information? She asked carefully. He wanted the truth to come out. He said that the families of the soldiers who died deserved to know what really happened to their loved ones. And he said that you were the only person involved who had the courage and integrity to make that happen. General Harrison realized that James Kowalski had just handed her the most difficult decision of her military career. The young woman sitting across from her was asking her to risk everything she had built to honor the memory of soldiers who had died under her command 25 years ago. The conversation that would determine the fate of Operation Thompson's buried secrets was just beginning, and General Harrison knew that nothing would ever be the same again. General Harrison studied the photograph on the conference table with trembling hands. The faces staring back at her were young, confident, and unaware of the tragedy that would soon befall their mission. Among them, she recognized Private Danny Martinez, Corporal Sarah Chun, and Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez. All three had died during Operation Thompson, their deaths officially attributed to a training accident that had never actually occurred. What's your name? General Harrison asked the young woman, though she dreaded learning more details that would make this situation even more real. Emma Kowalski. My grandfather raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. He never talked much about his military service until he got sick last month. That's when he started telling me things he said I needed to know. General Harrison remembered James Kowalski as a steady, reliable soldier who followed orders without question. The idea that he had spent 25 years planning to expose Operation Thompson seemed completely out of character. Yet here was his granddaughter, armed with evidence that could destroy careers and potentially compromise ongoing national security operations. Emma, you need to understand the seriousness of what you're suggesting. If your grandfather kept records of a classified operation, that could constitute a violation of federal law. Simply possessing such materials could put you at risk. Emma's expression remained resolute. My grandfather anticipated that response. He told me that powerful people would try to intimidate me into staying quiet. But he also said that you were different from them. He said you still had a conscience. The words stung because they contained more truth than General Harrison was comfortable acknowledging. Over the years, she had risen through the ranks by learning to compartmentalize difficult memories and focus on the broader mission of national defense. Operation Thompson had been buried in that same mental compartment, locked away and rarely examined. Tell me exactly what your grandfather told you about that mission, General Harrison said, deciding that she needed to know the full scope of what she was dealing with. Emma reached into a small backpack and withdrew a manila folder. He kept detailed journals throughout his military career. Most of it was routine stuff about training exercises and deployments. But there's a section about Operation Thompson that he wrote in a kind of code. He taught me how to decode it before he died. General Harrison felt her heart rate increase as Emma opened the folder. Inside were photocopied pages covered in James Kowalski's neat handwriting. Even from across the table, she could see dates and location references that corresponded to the classified mission. According to his journals, Operation Thompson was supposed to be a simple intelligence-gathering mission in Bosnia. Your unit was tasked with confirming the location of war criminals who were evading international justice. But when you arrived, you discovered something much bigger. The general's memory of those events was fragmented, partly due to the passage of time, and partly because her mind had worked to suppress the most traumatic details. But, as Emma continued reading from the journals, pieces began falling back into place. My grandfather wrote that your unit found evidence of a mass grave containing the bodies of over 200 civilians. But, when you reported this discovery to higher command, you were ordered to abandon the mission and withdraw immediately. General Harrison closed her eyes, remembering the horror of that discovery. The mass grave had been recent, and evidence suggested that American-supplied weapons had been used in the massacre. The geopolitical implications were staggering, potentially implicating NATO allies in war crimes and threatening the fragile peace process in the region. The order to withdraw came directly from the Pentagon, Emma continued. But you refused to leave without documenting the evidence and trying to identify the victims. That's when everything went wrong. The details came flooding back now. As a young captain, General Harrison had believed that documenting war crimes was more important than following orders that seemed designed to cover up atrocities. She had ordered her unit to photograph the mass grave and collect evidence that could be used for future prosecution. My grandfather wrote that you tried to do the right thing, even when your superiors threatened to end your career. But, while your unit was collecting evidence, you were attacked by unknown forces. General Harrison opened her eyes and looked directly at Emma. Your grandfather never told you who attacked us? He suspected they were mercenaries hired to eliminate witnesses to the massacre. But the official reports blamed the attack on local militants who supposedly mistook your unit for enemy forces. The battle that followed had been brief, but devastating. 3 soldiers had been killed, and several others had been seriously wounded. In the chaos that followed, all of the evidence they had collected was lost or destroyed. The survivors were evacuated and sworn to secrecy about everything they had witnessed. The cover-up began immediately. Emma continued reading from her grandfather's journals. All official records of Operation Thompson were classified beyond normal levels. The soldiers who died were listed as training accident casualties, and their families were told nothing about the real circumstances of their deaths. General Harrison remembered the funerals. She had attended each one, watching grieving families honor soldiers whose true sacrifice could never be publicly acknowledged. The guilt of those deceptions had followed her throughout her career, influencing every decision she made as she rose through the ranks. There's more, Emma said, turning to another section of the folder. My grandfather believed that the people responsible for ordering the cover-up are still in positions of power. He identified several individuals who were involved in suppressing the evidence and threatening the survivors. The implications of this statement hit General Harrison like a physical blow. If James Kowalski had indeed identified current government officials who were connected to the Thompson cover-up, Emma was carrying information that could trigger a massive political scandal. Emma, you need to understand that pursuing this information could be extremely dangerous. The people your grandfather identified have spent 25 years believing that Operation Thompson was completely buried. If they learn that evidence still exists, they will do whatever is necessary to protect themselves. Emma's response showed a maturity that belied her young age. My grandfather understood the risks. He told me that several of the Thompson survivors had died under suspicious circumstances over the years. Car accidents, heart attacks, suicides. He believed they were being silenced one by one. General Harrison felt a chill run down her spine. She had indeed heard about the deaths of several Thompson veterans, but had attributed them to the normal tragedies that affect any group of people over time. The possibility that they had been deliberately targeted had never occurred to her. Is that why he waited until now to come forward? Was he afraid for his safety? Partly yes, but also because he wanted to wait until he found someone he could trust to handle the information properly. He spent years researching your career, General Harrison. He followed your promotions, your assignments, your public statements about military ethics and accountability. The idea that James Kowalski had been watching her career for decades was both flattering and deeply unsettling. General Harrison had always tried to command with integrity, but she had also learned to navigate the complex political realities of military leadership. My grandfather believed that you had maintained your moral compass despite rising to a position of significant power. He thought you might be willing to risk your career to finally tell the truth about what happened to those soldiers and those civilian victims. General Harrison stood and walked to the window overlooking the base courtyard. Outside, soldiers were going about their daily duties, unaware that their commanding officer was being asked to make a decision that could shake the foundations of the military establishment. Emma, Even if everything your grandfather documented is true, exposing this information after 25 years would be incredibly complicated. Many of the people involved are dead or retired. The political landscape has changed completely, and there's no guarantee that seeking justice now would actually help anyone. Emma carefully placed the journals back in the folder. My grandfather anticipated that argument too. He said that the truth has value regardless of how much time has passed. The families of those soldiers deserve to know how their loved ones really died. The families of those civilian massacre victims deserve justice, even if it comes decades late. General Harrison turned back to face Emma, studying the determination in the young woman's eyes. She saw something of her own younger self in that expression, the idealistic belief that doing the right thing should take precedence over personal consequences. What exactly are you asking me to do? My grandfather wanted you to have this. Emma reached into the folder and withdrew a sealed envelope. He said this contains everything you would need to expose the truth about Operation Thompson. Names, dates, evidence that was supposed to have been destroyed. He spent 25 years carefully documenting everything he could remember and researching the people involved. General Harrison stared at the envelope without reaching for it. She understood that accepting it would be crossing a line from which there might be no return. The safe path would be to refuse the information, report this conversation through official channels, and let higher authorities deal with the potential security breach. But the safe path had never been her style. Throughout her career, she had earned respect by making difficult decisions and taking responsibility for their consequences. The soldiers who had died under her command in Operation Thompson deserved better than the lies that had been told about their sacrifice. If I take that envelope, what happens next? Do you disappear back to your normal life? Or do you expect to be involved in whatever comes after? Emma's answer revealed the depth of her commitment to her grandfather's mission. My grandfather left me detailed instructions about what to do once I delivered this information to you. There are backup copies of everything hidden in safe deposit boxes in 3 different cities. There are letters prepared for investigative journalists, congressional oversight committees, and international human rights organizations. General Harrison realized that James Kowalski had constructed an elaborate dead man's switch designed to ensure that the truth about Operation Thompson would eventually emerge regardless of what happened to his granddaughter or to General Harrison herself. He really thought this through, didn't he? He had 25 years to plan, and he knew that powerful people would do anything to keep this information buried. But he also believed that the truth would eventually find a way to surface, especially if it was placed in the hands of someone who had the courage to act on it. General Harrison finally reached across the table and picked up the sealed envelope. It felt heavier than its actual weight, loaded with the potential to transform everything she had built over her military career. Emma, if I decide to act on this information, there's no guarantee how it will end. Exposing a 25-year-old cover-up will create enemies in very high places. My career will almost certainly be over, and there may be legal consequences for both of us. Emma stood and shouldered her backpack, preparing to leave. My grandfather said that some things are more important than careers or personal safety. He said that honor means doing the right thing even when no one is watching, and even when it costs you everything. As Emma walked toward the door, she paused and looked back at General Harrison. He also said to tell you that Private Martinez, Corporal Chun, and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez would want their families to know the truth about how they died serving their country. After Emma left, General Harrison sat alone in the conference room, holding the envelope that contained the power to destroy her carefully constructed life. Outside, the sounds of normal base operations continued, but she knew that everything had changed. The decision she made in the next few hours would determine whether Operation Thompson remained buried forever or whether the truth would finally surface after 25 years of silence. The envelope remained unopened on the conference table as General Harrison tried to summon the courage to face whatever secrets James Kowalski had preserved. General Harrison stared at the sealed envelope for nearly an hour before finding the courage to break it open. Inside were dozens of documents, photographs, and handwritten notes that James Kowalski had collected over 25 years. The first page was a letter addressed directly to her, written in the careful script she remembered from military reports he had filed under her command. General Harrison, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and my granddaughter has successfully delivered the evidence I have spent decades preserving. I know this places you in an impossible position, but I believe you are the only person with both the authority and the integrity to finally set the record straight about Operation Thompson. As she read through James Kowalski's letter, General Harrison learned details about the mission that she had never known. According to his research, Operation Thompson had not been a random intelligence-gathering assignment. Instead, it had been carefully orchestrated to ensure that American forces would discover the mass grave and the evidence of war crimes committed with American weapons. The massacre was perpetrated by a paramilitary group funded through a secret CIA program, Kowalski's letter explained. When international pressure mounted to investigate war crimes in the region, certain officials needed to eliminate evidence of American involvement. They believed that sending a small military unit to accidentally discover the mass grave would allow them to destroy the evidence while maintaining plausible deniability. General Harrison felt sick as she read these revelations. She had always suspected that there was more to their mission than they had been told, but the possibility that they had been deliberately sent into a trap was almost too horrible to contemplate. According to my sources, the letter continued, the plan was for your unit to be eliminated after discovering the mass grave. Your deaths would be attributed to enemy action, and the evidence of American involvement would be destroyed along with any witnesses. However, your decision to immediately call for backup and document everything you found disrupted their timeline. The attack on their position suddenly made more sense. The enemy forces had seemed unusually well informed about their location and mission parameters. What she had attributed to bad luck or compromised communications had actually been a deliberate ambush designed to eliminate her entire unit. The 3 soldiers who died were not casualties of war, Kowalski wrote. They were murdered to protect a criminal conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the American government. Private Martinez, Corporal Chun, and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez died as heroes, but their families have never been told the truth about their sacrifice. General Harrison set down the letter and picked up a folder labeled Evidence. Inside were photographs that she remembered taking at the mass grave site, images she had assumed were lost when their equipment was destroyed during the attack. Somehow, James Kowalski had obtained copies of these photographs, preserving evidence of both the civilian massacre and the American weapons that had been used. Also in the folder were official government documents that she had never seen before. Internal memos discussing the need to eliminate evidence of American involvement in the massacre. Communications between high-ranking officials debating whether to allow Operation Thompson to proceed. Most shocking of all, a document explicitly authorizing the elimination of military personnel who posed a security risk to the operation. One name appeared repeatedly throughout these documents: Deputy Secretary of Defense Charles Morrison. In 1998, Morrison had been an ambitious assistant secretary with connections throughout the intelligence community. According to James Kowalski's research, Morrison had been the primary architect of the cover-up and the man responsible for ordering the attacks on their unit. General Harrison's hands shook as she read Morrison's current biography. Over the past 25 years, he had continued rising through the ranks of government service. He was now a respected elder statesman serving on multiple corporate boards and defense industry advisory committees. His reputation as a brilliant strategic mind had made him one of the most influential voices in American national security policy. The evidence against Morrison was extensive and damning. Internal communications showed him orchestrating the cover-up, threatening military officers who asked questions, and ensuring that Operation Thompson survivors were isolated and monitored. One particularly chilling document outlined his plan to eliminate the remaining witnesses through what he called natural attrition. James Kowalski's research had tracked the deaths of Operation Thompson survivors over the years. Staff Sergeant David Williams had died in a car accident in 2003. Specialist Jennifer Park had committed suicide in 2007. Corporal Michael Torres had suffered a fatal heart attack in 2012. Each death had occurred shortly after the survivor had begun asking questions about their military records or attempting to contact other Thompson veterans. I believe Morrison has been systematically eliminating anyone who could expose the truth about Operation Thompson, Kowalski's letter stated. My own health problems began shortly after I started researching the mission. I may be paranoid, but I suspect that my heart condition is not entirely natural. General Harrison realized that she was now in possession of evidence that could destroy one of the most powerful men in American defense policy. Morrison's influence extended throughout the Pentagon, the CIA, and the defense contractor community. Exposing his crimes would trigger a massive scandal that could destabilize the entire national security establishment. But the evidence was also compelling and detailed enough to potentially secure criminal convictions. Kowalski had spent 25 years carefully documenting Morrison's involvement in war crimes, conspiracy, and what appeared to be multiple murders. If even half of these allegations could be proven in court, Morrison would face life in prison. The question that tormented General Harrison was whether seeking justice after so many years would serve any meaningful purpose. Morrison was now 73 years old and unlikely to live much longer regardless of legal proceedings. The other officials involved in the original cover-up were mostly dead or retired. Pursuing the case would destroy her own career and potentially expose ongoing intelligence operations that relied on similar methods. On the other hand, the families of the soldiers who had died deserved to know the truth. Private Danny Martinez had been 22 years old when he was murdered, leaving behind a young wife and infant daughter. Corporal Sarah Chun had been planning to use her military benefits to attend medical school after completing her service. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez had been 3 months away from retirement and looking forward to starting a business with his brother. General Harrison found photographs of each fallen soldier in Kowalski's files, along with their official obituaries and details about the families they had left behind. Danny Martinez's daughter was now 27 years old, a schoolteacher who had grown up believing her father died heroically in a training accident. Sarah Chin's parents had established a scholarship fund in her memory, still unaware that their daughter had been murdered while trying to document evidence of war crimes. The weight of these revelations was crushing. General Harrison had built her career on the foundation of that classified mission, earning promotions partly because of her discretion in handling sensitive operations. Every achievement, every honor, every moment of professional pride was now tainted by the knowledge that it was all built on lies and cover-ups. Her phone rang, interrupting her agonized deliberations. The caller ID showed it was her aide, reminding her that she had a meeting with visiting Pentagon officials in 30 minutes. The irony was not lost on her that she was scheduled to discuss base security protocols while sitting in a room filled with evidence of government conspiracy and murder. "Sir, General Morrison is here early for your meeting. He's waiting in your office." The name hit her like ice water. Charles Morrison was here, on her base, at this very moment. After 25 years, the man responsible for ordering the deaths of her soldiers was sitting in her office, probably expecting a routine briefing on base operations. General Harrison quickly gathered all of Kowalski's evidence and locked it in her personal safe. She needed time to think, to plan, to decide how to proceed. But first, she had to face the man who had turned her first command into a nightmare and spent decades eliminating anyone who could expose his crimes. As she walked toward her office, General Harrison felt the weight of 25 years of suppressed knowledge. Every step brought her closer to a confrontation she had never expected to face. Morrison had come to her base presumably for routine business, unaware that she now possessed evidence that could destroy him. The hallway seemed endless as she approached her office door. Through the window, she could see Morrison sitting casually in her conference area, reviewing what appeared to be official documents. He looked older than she remembered, but still carried himself with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to wielding significant power. General Harrison paused outside her door, taking deep breaths to steady herself. In a few moments, she would be face to face with the man who had ordered the murders of her soldiers and spent decades covering up war crimes. She had no plan for how to handle this unexpected confrontation, but she knew that this moment would define the rest of her life. She opened the door and stepped into her office, where Charles Morrison looked up from his documents with a friendly smile that made her stomach turn. "Margaret, wonderful to see you again. I hope you don't mind that I arrived early. I was hoping we could have an informal chat before the official briefing." General Harrison forced herself to return his smile while her mind raced through the implications of this unexpected meeting. Morrison's presence could not be a coincidence. Emma Kowalski had visited the base only hours earlier, and now the man responsible for Operation Thompson was sitting in her office. "Of course, Charles. It's been quite a while since we've had a chance to talk." Morrison's expression remained pleasant, but something in his eyes suggested that this visit was more than routine business. General Harrison realized that she was walking into what might be the most dangerous conversation of her life, armed with explosive evidence, but facing an opponent who had already proven his willingness to commit murder to protect his secrets. The game that had begun 25 years ago with Operation Thompson was entering its final phase, and General Harrison was no longer sure who was the hunter and who was the prey. Charles Morrison settled back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who had spent decades manipulating people in positions of power. General Harrison took her seat behind her desk, acutely aware of the safe containing James Kowalski's evidence just a few feet away from where Morrison was sitting. I have to say, Margaret, you've done impressive work here at Fort Braxton. Your efficiency reports are exemplary, and the Pentagon speaks very highly of your leadership capabilities. General Harrison studied Morrison's face, searching for any indication that he knew about her meeting with Emma Kowalski. His expression remained friendly and professional, but she detected something calculating behind his eyes. Thank you, Charles. I've been fortunate to work with exceptional soldiers and staff. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Yes, loyalty is such an important quality in military leadership. The ability to inspire people to follow orders without question, to maintain discretion about sensitive matters. These are the qualities that separate truly effective commanders from ordinary officers. The emphasis on discretion sent a chill down General Harrison's spine. Morrison was sending her a message, reminding her of the unspoken understanding that had governed their relationship for 25 years. Speaking of discretion, Morrison continued, I've been reviewing some old personnel files lately. It's fascinating how much military service records can reveal about a person's character and judgment, particularly records from challenging deployments where officers faced difficult decisions. General Harrison forced herself to maintain eye contact while her heart pounded. Morrison was clearly referencing Operation Thompson, but she could not determine whether he was simply testing her continued commitment to secrecy or whether he knew about the evidence she had received. Early career assignments can certainly be formative experiences, she replied carefully. They teach young officers about the complexities of military service and the importance of following proper protocols. Morrison smiled, but the expression did not reach his eyes. Exactly. I remember reviewing your early service record when you were being considered for your first promotion to major. There was some concern about your judgment during a particular classified operation, but I was able to reassure my colleagues that you understood the importance of maintaining operational security. The implication was clear. Morrison was reminding her that her career had survived Operation Thompson only because he had protected her. He had the power to destroy her professional reputation by revealing selective details about the mission, painting her as an officer who had endangered national security by questioning orders. I've always appreciated the guidance I received from senior officers during my early career, General Harrison said, playing along with Morrison's game while her mind worked frantically to process this conversation. Good. That's what I expected to hear from you, Margaret. Loyalty and discretion are timeless military virtues. Morrison paused and reached into his briefcase. Which brings me to the reason for my visit today. He withdrew a folder and placed it on her desk. We've had some concerning intelligence suggesting that hostile foreign agents may be attempting to gather information about historical military operations. Specifically, they seem to be targeting veterans of certain classified missions from the 1990s. General Harrison felt her blood turn to ice. Morrison was not here for routine business. He knew about Emma Kowalski's visit, and he was here to ensure that she understood the consequences of cooperation with any investigation into Operation Thompson. What kind of information are they seeking? She asked, though she was beginning to understand that this entire conversation was a carefully orchestrated threat. Morrison opened the folder and withdrew several photographs. They showed Emma Kowalski walking onto the base, meeting with the soldiers at Building C, and being escorted to the administration building. The final photograph showed Emma leaving the base several hours after her arrival. This young woman visited your base yesterday using the name Emma Kowalski. Our security analysts have determined that she is likely a foreign operative using a false identity to gather intelligence about classified operations. The lie was so smooth and confidently delivered that General Harrison almost doubted her own knowledge of who Emma really was. Morrison had constructed a narrative that would allow him to discredit anything Emma might say about Operation Thompson, while simultaneously threatening General Harrison with charges of compromising national security. She claimed to be the granddaughter of a former soldier, General Harrison said carefully. She seemed to be seeking information about her family's military history. Morrison nodded sympathetically. These operatives are quite sophisticated. They often use emotional appeals and fabricated family connections to gain the trust of military personnel. We believe this particular operative was specifically targeting you because of your involvement in certain classified operations. The sophistication of Morrison's deception was breathtaking. He was simultaneously acknowledging that Operation Thompson existed while creating a cover story that would allow him to eliminate Emma Kowalski and suppress any evidence she might possess. What would you like me to do about this security breach? General Harrison asked, though she dreaded hearing the answer. Morrison's expression became serious and businesslike. First, we need you to prepare a detailed report about your interaction with this operative. Include everything she said, any questions she asked, and any materials she may have shown you. Second, if she attempts to contact you again, you are to notify security immediately and avoid any further communication. General Harrison realized that Morrison was giving her an opportunity to cooperate in covering up Emma's visit. If she filed the report he was requesting, she would be officially acknowledging that Emma was a foreign operative and that any evidence she possessed was fabricated intelligence designed to damage American national security. I understand the seriousness of the situation, she said, stalling for time while she tried to formulate a response. Morrison reached into his briefcase again and withdrew another document. There's one more thing, Margaret. We've identified several other military personnel who may have been targeted by this same intelligence operation. Unfortunately, most of them failed to recognize the threat and may have provided sensitive information to hostile agents. He handed her a list of names, and General Harrison's heart sank as she recognized them. They were the surviving members of Operation Thompson, the soldiers who had served under her command 25 years ago, and who James Kowalski believed had been systematically eliminated over the years. These officers will need to be interviewed by our security teams to determine what information may have been compromised. Given the sensitivity of their previous service, these interviews will need to be conducted at secure facilities outside normal military channels. General Harrison understood that Morrison was describing a process that would result in the disappearance of anyone who possessed knowledge about Operation Thompson. The surviving soldiers would be taken into custody under the pretense of national security, and they would never be seen again. How long do these security interviews typically last? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Morrison's smile returned, but now it looked predatory rather than friendly. That depends on the complexity of the case and the level of cooperation from the individuals involved. Some cases can be resolved quite quickly, while others, well, sometimes people disappear entirely when they become too much of a security risk. The threat was now completely explicit. Morrison was telling her that he had the power to make her disappear if she refused to cooperate in covering up Operation Thompson. But he was also offering her a chance to survive if she was willing to help him eliminate the remaining witnesses. I assume you'll want this matter handled with absolute discretion, General Harrison said, buying herself more time to think. Absolutely. The fewer people who know about this investigation, the better. In fact, I think it would be best if you handled the initial contact with these personnel yourself. They're more likely to trust a fellow Thompson veteran than unfamiliar security officers. Morrison was asking her to personally deliver her former soldiers into a trap. He wanted her to use their trust in her leadership to lure them to locations where they could be eliminated without suspicion. General Harrison felt a wave of nausea as she realized the full scope of what Morrison was proposing. He was not just asking her to remain silent about Operation Thompson. He was asking her to become an active participant in murdering the soldiers who had served under her command. This is a significant responsibility, she said slowly. I want to make sure I handle it properly. Morrison nodded approvingly. I knew I could count on your professionalism and discretion, Margaret. Your cooperation in this matter will not be forgotten when future promotion opportunities arise. He was offering her a reward for participating in murder, dangling the possibility of further career advancement in exchange for betraying her former soldiers. The casual way he made this offer suggested that such arrangements were routine for him. How much time do I have to prepare the necessary reports and contact the personnel on your list? She asked. Morrison checked his watch. I need your preliminary report about the suspected foreign operative within 24 hours. As for contacting the other personnel, I'd like that process to begin within the next few days. Time is of the essence, given the potential security implications. General Harrison nodded, though her mind was racing through possible alternatives to the trap Morrison had set for her. She needed time to warn the surviving Thompson veterans and to find a way to expose Morrison's crimes without getting herself or others killed. I'll begin working on this immediately, she promised. Morrison stood and gathered his documents. Excellent. I'll check back with you tomorrow to review your progress. And, Margaret, I trust one don't need to remind you about the importance of maintaining operational security during this investigation. After Morrison left, General Harrison sat in her office feeling the weight of an impossible decision. She could cooperate with Morrison's plan, which would likely result in the deaths of several innocent people, but would preserve her own life and career. Alternatively, she could attempt to expose his crimes, which would almost certainly result in her own death, but might finally bring justice for the soldiers who had died 25 years ago. She walked to her safe and withdrew James Kowalski's evidence. Among the documents was a list of the surviving Operation Thompson veterans, complete with their current addresses and contact information. Morrison would expect her to use this list to lure these people to their deaths. Instead, General Harrison reached for her secure phone and began making calls. If she was going to risk everything to expose the truth about Operation Thompson, she would need allies. The surviving veterans deserved to know that they were being hunted, and they deserved a chance to defend themselves. The final phase of the 25-year cover-up was about to begin, but General Harrison was determined to ensure that this time, the truth would not be buried with the witnesses. General Harrison spent the night making encrypted phone calls to the 4 surviving members of Operation Thompson. Each conversation was more difficult than the last, as she had to explain 25 years of suppressed truth while convincing battle-hardened veterans that their lives were in immediate danger. The first call was to Master Sergeant Robert Hayes, who had retired from the Army in 2010 and was now working as a security consultant in Denver. Hayes listened in stunned silence as General Harrison explained Morrison's plan and the evidence that James Kowalski had preserved. "I always suspected there was more to that mission than we were told," Hayes said finally. "When I heard about Danny, Sarah, and Mike getting killed, something felt wrong about the whole situation. But I never imagined it went this deep." General Harrison warned him about Morrison's plan to eliminate the remaining witnesses and advised him to disappear immediately. Hayes agreed to go into hiding while she worked to expose the conspiracy, but he also insisted on helping with the investigation. "Those soldiers died under our watch, General. If we have a chance to finally get justice for them, I'm in." The second call was to former Staff Sergeant Linda Peterson, who had left the military after Operation Thompson and become a teacher in Oregon. Peterson's reaction was more emotional, as she had spent years struggling with PTSD from the mission and had always blamed herself for surviving when others had died. "You're telling me that we were set up? That Morrison wanted all of us dead?" Peterson's voice cracked with emotion. "Those kids died because some politician wanted to cover up war crimes." General Harrison confirmed Peterson's worst fears and urged her to take precautions for her safety. Peterson agreed to leave town immediately but insisted on copying all of her personal records related to Operation Thompson before disappearing. The third call was to Colonel Marcus Williams, who was still on active duty and stationed at Fort Campbell in Kentucky. Williams was initially skeptical of General Harrison's claims, but his attitude changed when she mentioned specific details from Kowalski's evidence that had never been included in official reports. "If this is true, General, then we're talking about treason at the highest levels of government. Morrison isn't just some bureaucrat anymore. He has connections throughout the Pentagon and the intelligence community." Williams agreed to help gather evidence from military archives while taking steps to protect himself from Morrison's reach. As an active duty officer, he was particularly vulnerable to official retaliation, but he also had access to classified databases that could corroborate Kowalski's research. The fourth call was the most difficult. Former Corporal James Mitchell had struggled with drug addiction and homelessness since leaving the military. General Harrison tracked him to a Veterans Affairs rehabilitation facility in Phoenix, where he was slowly rebuilding his life after years of self-destruction. "I always knew something was wrong with that mission," Mitchell said in a voice hoarse from years of substance abuse. "I've been waiting 25 years for someone to tell me the truth about why my friends died." Despite his personal struggles, Mitchell possessed a detailed memory of Operation Thompson and was eager to help expose the conspiracy. He agreed to enter witness protection while providing testimony about what he had witnessed during the mission. By dawn, General Harrison had assembled a network of allies committed to exposing Morrison's crimes. But she also knew that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Morrison expected her to deliver a report about Emma Kowalski within hours, and he would become suspicious if she failed to begin contacting the other Thompson veterans. At 6 a.m., her secure phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Emma Kowalski, calling from a number she didn't recognize. "General Harrison, I need to warn you about something urgent. Yesterday after I left your base, I was followed by 2 men in a black sedan. They tried to force me off the road, but I managed to escape." General Harrison felt her stomach drop. Morrison was already moving against Emma, which meant he was probably preparing to eliminate all of the Thompson witnesses. "Where are you now?" she asked. "I'm safe for the moment, but I think they're still looking for me." "General, My grandfather prepared for this possibility. He told me that if anyone tried to stop us from exposing the truth, I should implement what he called the dead man's switch. Emma explained that James Kowalski had prepared multiple copies of all evidence and had arranged for them to be automatically released to journalists and congressional investigators if certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was if Emma failed to check in with his lawyer every 72 hours. The timer started yesterday when I visited your base. If I don't contact his lawyer by tomorrow morning, everything goes public automatically. General Harrison realized that Morrison's timeline had just become much more compressed. If he learned about Kowalski's dead man's switch, he would accelerate his plans to eliminate all witnesses before the evidence could be released. Emma, you need to stay hidden until we can figure out how to handle this safely. Morrison is more dangerous than we initially realized, and he has resources throughout the government. After ending her call with Emma, General Harrison sat in her office watching the sunrise through her window. In a few hours, Morrison would expect her preliminary report about the foreign operative who had visited the base. She had to decide whether to maintain her cover by filing a false report or to openly defy him and risk immediate retaliation. Her aide knocked on her door, interrupting her thoughts. General, you have a call from the Pentagon. It's Deputy Secretary Morrison. General Harrison's pulse quickened as she picked up the phone. Morrison's voice was as pleasant as ever, but she detected an edge of urgency that hadn't been present during their meeting yesterday. Margaret, I hope you've made progress on the report we discussed yesterday. I'm particularly interested in any documents or materials the foreign operative may have left with you. The question confirmed General Harrison's suspicions. Morrison knew about the evidence Emma had delivered, and he was fishing for information about what she had learned. I'm still reviewing my notes from that meeting, she said carefully. The individual made several claims about family military history, but I haven't finished verifying her statements. Morrison's tone became more insistent. I think it would be best if you could forward those materials to my office for analysis by our intelligence specialists. Given the potential security implications, we shouldn't delay the evaluation process. General Harrison understood that Morrison was demanding she turn over Kowalski's evidence immediately. If she complied, the proof of his crimes would disappear forever. If she refused, he would know that she had chosen to oppose him. Charles, I want to make sure I provide you with a complete and accurate report. Would it be possible for me to have until this evening to finish my analysis? There was a long pause before Morrison responded. Margaret, I'm concerned that you may not fully understand the urgency of this situation. The security implications of this breach are more serious than I initially indicated. I need those materials in my possession within the next few hours. The friendly pretense was beginning to crack. Morrison was no longer asking for her cooperation. He was demanding it. General Harrison knew that her next words would determine whether she had any chance of exposing his crimes or whether she would become another victim of the Operation Thompson cover-up. I understand your concern, Charles. Let me gather everything together, and I'll have it ready for pickup this afternoon. Morrison's relief was audible. Excellent. I'll send a courier to collect the materials at 1,400 hours. Please have everything packaged and ready for secure transport. After hanging up, General Harrison knew she had bought herself 6 hours to implement a plan that would either expose Morrison's conspiracy or result in her death. She could not hand over Kowalski's evidence, but she also could not simply refuse Morrison's demands without triggering immediate retaliation. She opened her safe and withdrew the evidence files, spreading them across her desk as she photographed each document with her personal camera. If Morrison was going to destroy the originals, she would at least ensure that copies existed in multiple locations. At 11 a.m., she received an encrypted message from Master Sergeant Hayes in Denver. He had successfully accessed his personal files from Operation Thompson and had discovered additional evidence that corroborated Kowalski's research. More importantly, he had made contact with an investigative journalist who specialized in exposing government corruption. By noon, General Harrison had assembled a complete case against Morrison. The evidence included documents proving his role in ordering the attack on Operation Thompson, communications showing his involvement in covering up war crimes, and records suggesting his responsibility for eliminating witnesses over the past 25 years. At 1,300 hours, 1 hour before Morrison's courier was scheduled to arrive, General Harrison made her final preparations. She had copied all evidence to multiple secure servers and had arranged for automatic release to journalists and investigators if anything happened to her. She had also prepared a confession detailing her own role in the Operation Thompson cover-up and accepting responsibility for her years of silence. Most importantly, she had decided to use Morrison's courier visit as an opportunity to record a confession from the man who had orchestrated 25 years of murder and conspiracy. Her office was equipped with recording devices that could capture conversations without being detected, and she planned to trick Morrison into admitting his crimes on tape. At exactly 1,400 hours, two men in dark suits arrived at her office. They identified themselves as intelligence officers working for Morrison, but General Harrison recognized them as the same men Emma had described following her after leaving the base. "Gentlemen, I have the materials Deputy Secretary Morrison requested. However, I'd like to speak with him personally before releasing them. Please tell him that I have some additional information that requires his immediate attention." One of the men made a phone call while the other watched General Harrison carefully. After a brief conversation, the first man hung up and nodded to his partner. "Deputy Secretary Morrison will be here within the hour. He asked us to wait with you until he arrives." General Harrison realized that Morrison was coming to personally ensure that she cooperated with his demands. This would be her only opportunity to confront him with the evidence and record his confession. Everything she had worked for over the past 24 hours would come down to the conversation that was about to take place. As she waited for Morrison to arrive, General Harrison thought about the soldiers who had died under her command 25 years ago. Private Danny Martinez, Corporal Sarah Chun, and Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez had trusted her to lead them honorably and to ensure that their sacrifice had meaning. For 25 years, she had failed them by remaining silent about the truth of their deaths. Today, she would finally have the chance to honor their memory and expose the man who had ordered their murders. Whether she survived the encounter was less important than ensuring that the truth about Operation Thompson would finally be revealed. The sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway signaled Morrison's arrival. General Harrison activated her recording devices and prepared for the most important conversation of her military career. The time for silence and cover-ups was over. The truth about Operation Thompson was about to be revealed, regardless of the consequences for anyone involved.